This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review. Hello, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, where we talk every week about books and research and things that we find interesting. I'm Dahlia Shenlin. Sadly, Gilad Halpern is not with us today, but he'll be back. This episode is brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, and it's part of our special series of podcasts in partnership with the Institute, focused on the Israeli elections in April. And we'd like to make a special appeal. If you like us, please show it. We really need your support. Please give to our show by going to our homepage, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll to the bottom, and you'll see a big red button that says Patreon. You can't miss it. Click it and support us. Thank you. We are very pleased today to welcome back Dr. Gilad Malach. He is a researcher at the Israel Democracy Institute and the head of the ultra-Orthodox program. He was on not too long ago talking about Israel's ultra-Orthodox population, which takes on much more relevance during the election season, and that's why we've invited him back to talk about his recent work, studies, and analysis of this community that seems so impenetrable to outsiders. Gilad Malach, welcome back to the show.
Hi, hello.
I want to start with a very open question. Do the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Israel like the modern state of Israel, or don't they? What kind of a relationship is this?
The point is that ideologically they have some problem with the state of Israel as a secular state. But they are quite, most of them, they are quite pragmatic in their understanding that there is a state and we need to live here and to participate, for example, in the elections. And according to that, they are part of the system. So they feel that they are here and they are going to stay here. So they communicate with all the systems.
I want to make just a distinction when you say that they sort of accept the state. They didn't like it because it was a secular state. Does that mean that if the state had been completely a religious state, if the institutions were dominated by Jewish religious law, halakha, that they would feel more organically part of it? Or is the problem that they may have had in the past, or some of them may have had, a theological problem?
The extremist that has these theological problem will continue to have it even if it will be a religious state. But of course, most of them, their relationship or attitude to the state reflects from the fact how much they feel at home, this Jewish state. So as it's religious or, for example, gives them budgets or support or other things, they will feel more at home in the state.
Okay, and just so we understand the nature of the few extremists that you say had a theological problem, can you explain to us what the original theological challenge for them was with having a state of Israel?
The challenge was connected to their belief that we will need to come back to Israel just when the Messiah will lead us to do it. And before that, it's something that you are forbidden to do it. It's something that you are doing against the nations, and you need to stay at the diaspora until the Messiah comes. But let me say, always it was the attitude of not of the mainstream. The mainstream didn't support the Zionism or the state of Israel, but understood, especially after the Holocaust, and especially the time of the establishment of the state, that they need to cooperate. And the result were that, for example, when I refer to participation in the elections, more than 90% of the ultra-Orthodox, since the establishment of Israel, they voted for the Knesset. And just maybe 5%, 6% of the population banned the elections because of these theological reasons.
That's actually higher than the average voter turnout.
When I say 90, maybe almost 95%, it doesn't mean that everybody came to vote. But I mean, in general, they supported the idea that they need to vote. Of course, for personal reasons, they might not vote. But you may refer to an interesting point that beside these extremists, the turnout of the Haredi voters is very high. I mean, they are really participating. I can say if we check, for example, the Haredi towns, we see that the participation, the turnout is around 85%, something like that. It's much higher than the almost 70% turnout of the general population. So for most of them, it's not just something important, it's also a mitzvah, something that they need to do according to the Torah to vote for the Knesset and to have our religious representatives.
Well, then I have to ask, I mean, how do they make their decisions? Are they thinking in the same way as a non-Haredi voter, a non-ultra-Orthodox voter who, all the emphasis in Western democracy is on free will, individual choice, independent thinking, and that's not as high a priority in their community, right? So are they thinking as individuals about what to do and whom to vote for and whether or not to vote, or are they following a leader of the community, a rabbi, or somebody who influences them? How do they make their decisions?
I can say in general, referring to most of the population, the answer is that they are obeying the decision of the great rabbis. You can say that we have the 10 commandments, but regarding the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel, there is the 11th commandment, which is you need to obey to the rabbi forever what they say.
I thought you were going to say one of the 10 commandments is vote for Agudat Israel, the party.
No, okay. It's just
Not
the
quite.
11th.
Okay,
It's just
the
the
11th.
11th. But it's very important, the fact that you need to obey whatever you like the party, the ultra-religious party or not, you need to vote because the great rabbis told you to vote. And even they say the achievements of the Haredi parties is Kiddush Hashem, is something that shows the success of God.
Sanctifies God.
Yeah. So that's very important for the mainstream. But we can see a phenomenon that at the last few elections, there are a growing numbers of people of individuals that doesn't want to obey and says, we are not satisfied with the ultra-religious parties and we might vote for other parties.
I'm very excited to discuss this, but before I ask you about that, I want to ask you, now that I've made all these broad, sweeping generalizations about them and they, can we even talk about a they? How much diversity is there within this community? I mean, we look at, from the outside, we look at this 10% roughly of Israeli society and we call them ultra-Orthodox. But there are, of course, many different groups and sects and probably different political breakdowns and religious breakdowns. Can we characterize them together? What do they have in common and where are they different?
I can say in general that there are three main groups and therefore three main political parties within the ultra-Orthodox society. We have the Lithuanian Yeshivish group, we have the Hasidic group, and we have the Mizrahi Sephardi group. Each group has around 1/3 of the population. And each group, as I said, has a political party. For the Lithuanian, they have Degel Torah, the flag of Torah. The Hasidic has Agudat Israel, United Agudat Israel, and the third, the Sfaradim, has Shas party. But there were years that Degel Torah means Degel Torah, the Ashkenazim, Yeshivish Ashkenazim, and Agudat Israel, the Hasidim, they run separately. But since 1992, they are running together. In one party, Yahadut HaTorah, United Torah Judaism. But the Sephardic party, the other 1/3, they are running with Shas party. Why? I can say in general that there are two main reasons for the separation in the elections. One thing is that Shas party at the 80s began with the fact that for years, although they were ultra-Orthodox Sfaradim, but for years they didn't get some seats in the classic Haredi party. So
because they were kept out of these Ashkenazi-dominated parties.
There were discrimination against them.
In other words, the Ashkenazi-Mizrahi discrimination in Israel, the divide, has penetrated every community, including the ultra-Orthodox.
But I can say it was even much more in the ultra-Orthodox political parties, because if we are referring to the 80s, at that time, every political party has mixture between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, but in Agudat Israel, the Mizrahi representative was always one after the realistic expectations. For example, if they expected to get 4 mandates, they put the Sephardi representative at number 5. So they felt horrible about that, and this is one of the reasons that they started to have the Shas party. But this discrimination wasn't just in the political representative, it was also connected to schools.
And still is, right?
Yeah, it still exists, and this is one of the reasons why they don't want to be part of one party, because they don't feel totally at home. This is one reason. Another reason is connected to Shas. Shas voters, some of them are not ultra-Orthodox, and that's really different than Agudat Israel, United Torah Judaism. All the voters of United Torah Judaism are ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazim. But the Mizrahi voters, some of them are ultra-Orthodox and some are traditional, religious, traditional, even some secular people voted for Shas because of the reason that they represent the Mizrahi people and gave them proud of have representatives from this community.
So you're saying, in other words, the Ashkenazi parties never moved beyond an ultra-Orthodox voter constituency because those people didn't feel the need for specific representation unless they were ultra-Orthodox. Ashkenazim didn't need particular parties to represent them because all the parties had Ashkenazi representatives. But the Mizrahi voters, you're saying, needed to have a party representing them even if they themselves weren't ultra-Orthodox.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, and it's important because there is a change in that attitude, and maybe it's connected to changes in the general political arena, because maybe at the 80s and the 90s, and even at the beginning of the 21st century, there was still a feeling that they will represent, even if we are just secular or even if we are traditional or religious and not ultra-Orthodox, they might represent us. But according to Israel of today, they are representatives from all of the diversity of the society, and the traditional Mizrahi don't feel that they need a specific ultra-Orthodox party. And if I, for example, refer to the 90s, at that time, 2/3 of the voters of Shas weren't ultra-Orthodox. But at 2015, just 1/3 weren't ultra-Orthodox. So we see that this party, even Shas, becomes more and more ultra-Orthodox, even regarding to its voters.
Well, it's an interesting shift over time because I think that the most striking election from the perspective of Shas was 1999, right? They received 17 mandates. Nobody expected it. And of course, there simply aren't 17 seats worth of voters who are ultra-Orthodox and Mizrahi, right? So could it be that they just attracted a lot of these people, this diversity that you mentioned, for a phase, and then those people decided they don't need to vote for Shas anymore? And if they went away, why did they leave? 1999 wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, specifically, 1991 was connected to the conviction of Aryeh Deri.
1999,
Yeah. There was a great wave of blaming the system, that the system didn't want Aryeh Deri's success or something like that. And a lot of people really felt this feeling, and therefore they voted for Shas.
Let's just remind our listeners that Aryeh Deri was and is the legendary head of the Shas party. And he was at that time convicted on corruption charges. And many people rallied to his defense.
Exactly. And I can say that not just in 1999, but also until 2015, Shas got between 10 and 12 mandates. But at 2015, they got just 7 mandates. Why? Because this trend that the traditional voters, not the ultra-Orthodox voter, didn't feel at home anymore. And they felt, for example, just to give an example, some of them felt, why not to vote for the Likud party? We feel they're at home, or Kulanu of Moshe Kahlon, or all the parties, they feel if we are not ultra-Orthodox, we might vote for other party. Another reason is connected to the fact that Harav Ovadia Yosef, the spiritual leader of Shas, was a very well-known rabbi in Israel, and a lot of people, even not ultra-Orthodox people, really respected him. And after he passed away in 2013, his power and his political power just gone. And the current spiritual rabbi of Shas, Harav Cohen, nobody heard of him besides the ultra-Orthodox community.
Well, it's interesting. I was definitely going to ask you if this is, the split between the Ashkenazi and Mizrahi parties is a matter of actual, religious and theological differences or people not feeling represented. And it sounds like you think it has much more to do with people not feeling represented. But the fact that Shas is declining, and something else that I'd like to ask you about, the fact that the Ashkenazi parties are not really growing, even though the population has somewhat increased, makes me wonder, are we witnessing an era where there may be the beginning of an erosion of this tribal sense of who people vote for? Like you said, Mizrahi might vote for any number of parties now, and traditional people might vote for a whole range of parties. Are we starting to see a change in this very locked-in kind of Israeli tribal system?
There are a lot of people that wondering.
Well, I'm one of them.
To understand this mystery of I mean, how can we explain the fact that even at the 90s, the power of the political parties were almost like the same as it today, although they are growing, the ultra-Orthodox society is growing rapidly. How can we explain that? There are several explanations for that. One of them is not connected to the ultra-Orthodox society, but it is connected to the fact that since then there was more than 1 million people that came from the USSR, the former Soviet Union, and of course they have a power that make the influence of the demographic growth to be slower than we expected.
As a percentage of the population.
Exactly. This is one thing. But another thing is connected to the fact that I already mentioned that a lot of voters weren't ultra-Orthodox, and today they are not voting for Shas, especially for Shas. The last thing that I want to mention is that if at the past, if I refer to the Ashkenazic party, United Torah Judaism, at the past they succeeded to get almost, let's say, 95% of its community, except the 5% of the extremists, nowadays they don't have the same success. On one hand, there are a growing number of people who belong to specific fraction called the Jerusalem fraction that maybe they are another 6-7% of the voters, but they decided to ban the elections. So now the extremists, to boycott it. So now the extremists are not just 5%, but 12%. And on the other side, our assumption is that there are around 20% of the ultra-Orthodox population that doesn't vote anymore for the ultra-Orthodox classic political party, meaning United Torah Judaism. So if you lose 7% here and 20% here, you don't get the seats that you expected or everybody expected.
Well, I think this is a fascinating development. And first of all, as a public opinion researcher, I have to ask you, how do you estimate that? Do you have surveys of this population asking them who they voted for? Or do you look at neighborhood actual result breakdown? How do you estimate that? I think you said 17% in some of your articles, right, who don't vote for
Exactly. I now said 20% because I made some calculations regarding the Haredi towns, and it was 2015, 17%. After 10 years before that, it was 10%. So we see the change, in 10 years, but there were a spatial survey just now that it grows from 17% to 20%. So we see that it is constant, a growing percentage of the population that doesn't want to vote for Haredi parties. But on the other side, we see an interesting change also in the general political parties. We see that they think about an option to get some voters from the ultra-Orthodox society. And also we see that the modern ultra-Orthodox that don't find themselves at United Torah Judaism, they think about participate as part in the classical, in the general political party. A few examples for that. In the Likud party, at the last election, just now they decided that the seat number 43 will be to an ultra-Orthodox representative. Although nobody expects for number 43, but the fact that they put an ultra-Orthodox representative, it is the
That's
first
new.
time.
It never happened before.
Yeah, and also we saw at the Labour Party a young woman that participated in the primaries. Although, again, she was elected just to number 22 or something like that.
With the way Labour Party's polling right now, it looks like a long shot.
You're right. There was an effect to the fact that she was just a nominee in the primaries, the fact that a lot of people heard of her. And for the long term, there is a chance that one day she will be part of the family. And also in the new political party, Kahol Lavan, blue and white, Gantz and Lapid party, there is a Haredi nominee for seats that most of the chances that will be in the next Knesset, Omer Yankelevich, and she's an ultra-Orthodox woman that for the first time will be in the Knesset. So the modern ultra-Orthodox feels in this variety of general political party that they have parties to vote and they don't need to vote for the classic United Torah Judaism or Shas.
Is this related to changes within the ultra-Orthodox community in general? We know that there is a slowly rising number of people joining the army, men, even if it's still small numbers, but it's rising incrementally. We know that there's slow increasing rates of participation in the workforce. And we also know about political initiatives from the last election, the attempt to form an ultra-Orthodox women's party, a breakaway from Shas. Are we looking at a change in general in the insular nature of the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, not only in politics?
Exactly. I mean, I think that the changes in politics are a result of the general change that we see regarding the labor market, regarding higher education, regarding serving in the army and things like that. And because of these changes, some of the voters don't feel that the Haredi parties represent them. And therefore, they are trying to think about other options. But also, I can say that even the political parties, the Haredi political parties, understand this shift in the attitude of some of the voters, and they are trying today to say, we are representing not just the ultra-Orthodox that continue to study Torah, we are also represent the workers. And they try to do some efforts, even within the Kadesh. We saw, for example, that they were fighting for a legislation of affirmative action for ultra-Orthodox in order that they will have affirmative action in governmental offices. Now, in order to work in government office, you need an academic degree. Now, basically, they are against it. But on the other hand, they understand that a lot of the voters having this academic degree and want it. So they had no choice but to fight for these voters. So the change, although 80%, almost 80% of the ultra-Orthodox will continue to vote for the classical Haredi political parties, the Haredi understand that they need also to behave a bit differently if they want them to continue to do it.
Let's talk a little bit more about the political nature of these parties. What do they want? What issues are they trying to advance generally, traditionally? And you've talked about some of the changes, but what have they generally advocated up until now?
In general, I can say that their focus, first of all and above all, was always connected to the autonomy of the ultra-Orthodox society. This autonomy might be connected to the question of exemption from the army for men, the option to study Torah, for women, total exemption from the army, and the education, the independence of the education system, and the fact that the will that the state won't interfere in their education system, and beside that, all the financial support to have all these autonomical system, the support for yeshivot, support for their education system. They had in the past achievements connected to children allowances and things like that. So all these subsidies, and even, for example, they have their system for financial support or other support for families, gmachim, charity, and there were some threats that it might affect some general laws of banking or something like that. And the Haredi representative were fighting not to have regulation on these charity systems in order to keep them going on and not have a change in regulations that might see some thing that are not,
favorable to them.
Yeah.
But in other words, they were advocating for issues that relate specifically to their community and, separate from the major issues being advocated by other Israeli parties. And for this reason, we usually look at the ultra-Orthodox parties as kind of insistent on going into the government coalition, whether it's a right-wing coalition or a left-wing coalition, as long as they can advance their interests. But if the next government should happen to be led by blue and white party, which we don't know, but if it is, with Yair Lapid in there, who has generally committed himself to advancing legislation to draft the ultra-Orthodox at higher rates than they are now, what kind of a fight will they put up? Will they say, we will not go into this coalition, or we will go into the coalition on the condition that Lapid drop this demand to try to pass legislation and get them into the army?
They prefer, in general, the ultra-Orthodox parties, they prefer the Likud party. Consistently, since 1977, they prefer the Likud. But if there is an option to build an alternative coalition, in most of the cases, they prefer to join this coalition. And I'll tell you why does it happen. Because, as I told you, their will to help, to assist their communities is the most important thing. So although most of them tend to the right wing, although that it's less important for them than keeping the interest of the ultra-Orthodox society. So if there is an option to build a center or a left government, and on one hand, they don't like it, but on the other hand, there is a danger that if they won't join this coalition, it will affect the subsidies, for example, of the community. They will decide to join. And I can tell you, even regarding to this blue and white party and the options that they will build the coalition, although all the declarations that they say today that we won't join this coalition, if they will see that they have no option but to join this coalition, I mean, no option to keep their self-interests, they will do it. And they will find some way to compromise, I mean, both sides, to compromise about some of the wills regarding the conscription and to other issues in order to keep the interest. And I can say, and they say now very clearly, we won't join any government but Netanyahu government. One day I can show you some records that they say at 2015 we don't have bad relationships with Yair Lapid, we can do anything. I mean...
Which doesn't set them apart, in fairness, from any other party here, because the favorite game of Israeli elections is to say, we won't go into the coalition with this or that. And in the end, everybody wants to go into the coalition.
Exactly. I mean, and the point is that all this declaration is just in order to have some more voters. So that's it. But after the elections, all the game starts from the beginning.
Well, I still want to go back to this issue of the question of whether certain traditional tribes are breaking down, because I want to go back to 1999. It seems to me a key election, first of all, because Shas had that big surprise win of 17 votes, but also the other party that did very well then was the party of the former Soviets, right? Sharansky's party. And their big statement was against Shas. And Shas was against them. Well, I don't know if Shas was actively against them, but it was almost like a battle of these two particular tribes. And now we look at the remaining former Soviet party, which is Lieberman's party, and he's barely crossing the electoral threshold. And Shas is pretty low right now. And as you pointed out, higher numbers of ultra-Orthodox may not be voting for ultra-Orthodox parties at all. And so I just wonder if we're going to see a realignment of Israeli politics where people really think about parties based on the issues they care about rather than representing my identity.
I can tell you that there is a difference between the ultra-Orthodox and the others, but we have some signs that a phenomenon that took place around very large groups will also take place within the ultra-Orthodox society. I mean the fact that the main concept in Israel regarding to tribes, especially your origin, for example, if you are from North Africa, if you are Mizrahi, or if you are former Soviet Union, the Israeli concept at the end of the day is integration. Integration. After 20 years, 30 years, you are integrated and you are part of the state and you vote according to your own belief. And this is the reason why party like Israel Beitenu, Lieberman's party, after 10, 20 years that the voters are in Israel, they don't feel anymore that they need to vote for this specific party. We also see it regarding the Mizrahi issue. At the 80s, it was a great issue, even at the 90s. But nowadays, it's not a real issue. And of course, the children and the great children of people who were born, whether in North Africa or in Europe, don't vote according to this origin, but according to their own concept and ideology. But at the Haredi, and we also can see it even within the modern religious group. For years, most of the religious people voted for the religious party, at that time, National Religious Party. But nowadays, we see that they vote for several parties. Some of them vote for the Likud, some of them vote for the National Classic Party, and some of them for Hayamin HaChadash, the new right of Bennett. So they are going anywhere when they feel that they can represent their ideology and not just their group. And we see some signs that it starts to happen at the ultra-Orthodox society. But I can just say that the concept of integration, it's not a concept within the ultra-Orthodox society.
There's a different goal there. Their goal is isolation, or at least has been traditionally.
Exactly. And even if we refer to Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, in general, Israel, there is still a bit talk about it, but in general, the will is integration, full integration. But in the Haredi community, the goal is not integration. The goal is that everybody will continue his tradition. If you are Mizrahi, you need to continue the Mizrahi tradition. And if you are Ashkenazi, you need to continue the Ashkenazi tradition. So even the will is not integration.
Well, now I have to ask you the final question, because even if we acknowledge that, still we have this roughly 20% who are considering voting according to other considerations. And those other considerations might be self-interest, in terms of social conditions and labor rights and such, but they also might be ideology. And there is a long-standing kind of belief among some people that I hear constantly kind of coming up in the discourse that actually the ultra-Orthodox in Israel are not very right-wing. They may be somewhat more dovish somehow. Now, I'm not going to tell you where I stand as a pollster, but I want to hear your view. Is this population fundamentally right-wing in terms of Israeli ideology, or are they somehow a little bit softer and more left-leaning than, let's say, the national religious?
No, they are, even according to our polls, they are even more right-wingers than the national religious.
As a pollster, I can only agree.
So I can tell you that even according to polls, when you ask these 20%, who will you vote for? Most of them saying that they're going to vote for the Likud party. And I can explain you why. Because if they feel that a religious party, an ultra-Orthodox party, can't represent them, in most cases they are looking for another big issue that they can vote for. And the national issue, instead of the religious issue, might be something that they feel that it can represent them. So most of them find the right wing as a national option for them. So they go for the Likud party or for some even more right-wing parties. This is most of the people who doesn't vote for ultra-Orthodox party. They decide to do so. But there are some who tend to the center and to the left, but they are still maybe just between 5 to 10%.
Okay, still finding a new identity. Gilad Malach, researcher at the Israel Democracy Institute on the program of ultra-Orthodox in Israel. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
And a big thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Georgia Foscarini and Itai Shelem, our producers, and to the Israel Democracy Institute for their support for this series. Now, a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we'd like to ask you to please consider writing us a review in the ratings and review section. I mean, you have to write a good review, of course. Well, you can write a critical review. We take all opinions. You can also support us by going to our website, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing on our Patreon campaign. We've got gifts and perks for you. Check out our archive with about 500 interviews. And if you like us, please also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast, Ideas from Israel, and follow us on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.